And your last storyteller for the evening, Michael Kay.
Michael Kay. Michael Kay. Wow. I could have just kept going, but I decided to come up here. Well, I didn't think I was going to sit in this stool, but it looks kind of comfortable. So, hi. Hello. Now I'm going to stand. So, I've got, I kind of have a crazy life. I work 15-hour shifts at a winery in Fresno, California with a bunch of ex-Mexican rodeo stars. And while that all sounds culturally enlivening, it just has a way of magnifying my Woody Allen-esque-ness. And it also kind of keeps me culturally narrow. My father says Fresno has wide roads but narrow minds. And that's why, I spend a lot of time in Berkeley, which is kind of the opposite, actually, if you think about it. But I digress. There's only 2 films that I know that have been made about Amman Jordan. One is War Dogs, about 2 ex-yeshiva bachers who start an international arms dealership, funneling money to terrorist organizations in Jordan to get arms to the U.S. Army in Iraq. And the other is a film aptly titled Body of Lies, starring Leonardo DiCaprio. You probably never saw it, but anyway, which is also basically a film about a guy meeting with lots of terrorist organizations, getting abducted, and trying to funnel arms to the American Army. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. You see, last year I decided it was finally time to really get out of Fresno. And I decided I was going to go do a winemaking fellowship in Israel. I didn't know where I was going to go, but it just so happened that while I was back east the previous spring, I had met a winemaker from Shiloh, which is in the Shomron, about 35 minutes north of Yerushalayim. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Shomron is in the West Bank. But it's not just the West Bank. It's kind of like the Wild West of the West Bank. Most of the people there don't speak English, whereas in the southern part of the West Bank, you get a lot of ex-American patriots, or expatriates. But, yes, exactly. But the interesting thing is, I really knew nothing about this place. And I just wanted to learn about winemaking. This was the offer that came my way. I hopped on a plane. I ended up 15 hours later, thanks to United. I guess United must be sponsoring tonight's show. And I hope I'm getting some miles on this. So anyway, I ended up landing in Ben Gurion. And the winemaker's son picked me up. I was completely exhausted. We drove through the middle of the night to get to the Shomron. And just as we're about to get to the settlement of Shiloh, a giant black creature runs across the freeway. And I didn't know what it was. It was probably the size of a large hippo. And it turns out it was a pig. What it turns out is that Israel is actually the promised land of the pigs. Because Jews and Muslims don't eat pork, it turns out to be a safe haven for these guys. And as I arrived in my settlement, kind of wondering where the hell I really was, I was told that all the Chardonnay grapes had been eaten by the pigs. I thought, wow, this is going to be bad, but they were truly in hog heaven. So I'll try to preempt my puns if I can. So anyway, I managed to settle in, which they gave me about 1 day, 2, and then I started my 19-hour shifts that started at 2 in the morning and went till 9 p.m. at night. I thought this was going to be, an exotic cultural experience, but in Israel, Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov! So in Israel, they really take the term intern to heart. Sort of like, you remember if you had ever seen the film Karate Kid, Wax On, Wax Off? There were a lot of scenes like that during my internship, where I was washing down tanks and they were just going like this, and they would keep walking by. Anyway, one of the reasons that I decided I wanted to do my internship in Israel was to meet Jewish women. I figured, look, Fresno seems to be a desert. Berkeley's not happening. Let me go to the promised land. For sure I can meet Jewish women there. So I sent around my resume, which is sort of how it's done in Jewish circles. It's so strange. It's like, what's your FICO score? Can I see your medical history from both sides of the family? Please list all issues, triggering points. Just, if you could, please give us a sketch of what we might be getting into. And they suggested one person who I guess was their way of reading Middle East. She was in Ohio. So that didn't seem to be the right pathway. Any case, the local matchmakers didn't want to set me up with their maidens because I hadn't made Aliyah yet, and they were afraid that maybe I would take one of them and bring them back to Berkeley or something like that, God forbid. And it became obvious to me after a time period that it was actually very hard to meet Jewish women in Israel. Now, I happened to sort of create for myself an adopted family in the little settlement where I was living. There's only 100 families in the settlement, no stores, no stores, no theaters, no nothing. Basically just homes. There was one falafel stand that was open on Wednesdays. So anyway, this lovely little family took me in, and they would have me for Shabbos, and I got to know their kids, and they had 6 kids, and they had 6 roosters, and they had 6 cats, and they had 6 fish. They had a little dog who wore a pink plaid sweater. Very nice. And one day I'm talking with the mother, and she has a worried look on her face, and I ask her, what's going on? She says, well, we have this situation where one of the teenage girls in our community, she ended up meeting one of the local Arab guys and got married to him, and now she's living with him, and we're trying to get her back because it's a dangerous marriage. And I'm shocked. I'm asking myself, and I asked her, I said, how do they meet? It's not like, while we were surrounded by Palestinian villages, it wasn't like there was a store that we all went to or a bus stop where settlers and Palestinians got together and, traded pot or something like that. I'm just trying to use a Berkeley analogy, you understand. So she tells me it's not an uncommon occurrence, and there's an organization that tries to save these girls, and I look around and I see they have, 4 teenage girls, and I'm thinking, how on earth does this happen? Could this happen to one of them? So when I decided that I was going to go do this internship in Israel, I really had no idea about the politics there in that area. People here, even in the Berkeley community, had told me, don't go there. You're going to either be killed by Arabs or you're going to be killed by settlers. This was a very sort of warm, encouraging kind of message to send me on my way. But what I found over there, and what I have found in my life, is that what lies on the other side of a boundary is not always what you think. Now, this family that I mentioned to you turned out to be very loving and very caring, and they tried to set me up with different people. But, I don't speak Yemenite. That kind of blew that one. I wasn't ready to marry somebody who already had 9 children, which was considered, a mid-sized family there, like a mid-sized sedan. And eventually, I just decided to take matters into my own hands. And I went on something that might just be, despite its name, the path to peace in the Middle East. That's right, Tinder. So now, for those of you who've been on Tinder, you probably don't typically read the bios because you're just either swiping yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And, for guys, or at least for this guy. You know, for every 1,000 you swipe, you get maybe one back, you know. And it's usually somebody's mom who's swiping for her. So anyway, I was on Tinder, and I was doing this, I wasn't paying attention, and one day I get this ping. And the woman's name is Aziza. And she says, we should talk. So I said, okay, we should talk. So we exchanged numbers, blah, blah. She gives me a call, and she's like, tell me about yourself. You know, in that sexy Middle Eastern accent, tell me about yourself. So I said, well, I'm an Orthodox Jew living in a West Bank settlement trying to learn about wine. What about you? I'm a Muslim Palestinian living in Amman. I thought, wow, okay, I'm not quite sure where to go with this one. What do you like to eat? Oh, I love camel. Camel. I said, well, you know, I'm not exactly a camel-eating kind of guy. Why not, she says. It's not kosher, but it's so delicious. I said, okay, what else do you eat? Oh, I like rabbit. Wow, rabbit, this is really going well. So, you know, there were some rabbits in our settlement, and I wasn't really up to catching them, skinning them, and bringing them to her as an offering. So I thought of this as an interesting cultural exchange. We had a nice little pleasant conversation, and I wrote it off. I decided I was going to continue to try to meet Jewish women, which was really the goal. So I went out with one woman. After a couple of weeks, she told me I wasn't serious enough. I don't mean serious about the relationship, I meant serious just in general. So I prayed to God, and I said, God, would you please just bring me somebody who's got a good sense of humor, somebody who likes to laugh. So I'm at a friend's wedding about a week later, and I meet this lovely woman, and I ask her out, and we go on a couple dates, and I discover, lo and behold, she's a hospital clown. So, of course, after a couple of weeks, she told me, you know, Michael, you're just too serious. I managed to scrape together another date, and she simply summed it up after 15 minutes. You're just too interesting. You know, I tried. So I was really beginning to despair, and I spoke to an Israeli friend of mine and said, do you have any advice? He said, why don't you just Google it? So I Googled challenges dating Jewish women. I don't know if it was their top 10 keywords of the day, but it turns out Oprah Winfrey has a special on this subject. And the guy that was on the show, who was, you know, an example of a Jewish man, I think he was like a professor of law at Yale, and then like moonlighted as Matthew McConaughey's like stunt double in the male dancing movie Magic Mike or something like that. And even he, with his Chippendale pecs and cerebral stellar mind, seemed to have a problem getting dates. And while you might think this vindicated me, made me feel less alone, it actually made me feel even more hopeless. So I was working these hours, I was getting more and more depressed, and eventually I just got sick. And I was lying in my bed in my trailer, the wind blowing through the wall, and coughing, I'm fevered, and I just asked God, I said, God, just help me. Now, you know, the great thing about God is you can say these things, but it's not like God just shows up with a cup of tea and a bowl of matzo ball soup. Oh, sorry, my friend, you know. Well, a few minutes later, I get a text. It's the Arab woman, Aziza. How are you? I said, well, I'm actually very sick. She said, you must make this. She makes a listing of herbs, I don't know, cumin, pepper, lemon juice, something else, I don't know what it is. She says, take this, I promise you, you will feel better. So I'm thinking, an Arab elixir? Well, what the hell else do I have to do? So I drag my bones out, I go down to the local shuk, the local little market in town, I buy all these herbs, I bring them back to my caravan, and I brew them up. About 30 minutes later, I'm on cloud nine. It's like somebody has given me a shot of life, literally. I'm so happy I just get in my car and drive all the way to Yerushalayim singing. You know, this is not what I thought would happen when I came to the West Bank, to be healed by an Arab. Well, we start talking every day on WhatsApp. I open the curtains in my room, I let the sun shine in, and I press play. Her mother was a professor of Arabic in Egypt. Her father abandoned the family when she was 1. She is a published author and had written 2 novels. She loves to cook. Every day she sends me picture after picture of delicacy that she makes. Labna with olive oil, pomegranates over some tahini, lafa covered in halva and date honey. I mean, come on. You know, I've heard of like a way to a man's heart is through his stomach, but this is like on steroids. And it just goes on and on, delicacy after delicacy. And she starts telling me about her life. She's a flight attendant for a Middle Eastern airline. She lives in Amman, Jordan, but she was originally from Egypt. She believes strongly in God. And what I notice is how often she references God. Part of it has to do with the Arab lexicon. Insha'Allah, you know, may it be God's will. But she says Insha'Allah and Ma'shallah and all these things constantly. She's constantly referencing God when she's speaking. And in a strange way, it opens me. When Frum Jews or fundamentalist Christians tell me things like, praise the Father in heaven, or even Baruch Hashem, particularly with an Alabama accent, I get a little nervous. I'm a little closed to the idea. But when she talks about God, something in my whole body relaxes. It's not that she's trying to push Islam on me, far from it. But what she is doing just in who she is being a reflection of something divine and accepting. And it's not that she just talks about God. She shows in a way how she and God, through God, is accepting of herself. When she calls me and leaves a message, there's no airs about it. There's no fancy stuff. It's just like, good morning, how are you, how's everything? Today I'm going to clean my toilet. You know, good morning, how are you, how is everything? I am tired this morning, but I am hungry. Maybe if I get hungry enough, I will get out of bed, but I don't know. And in modeling this incredible comfort in her own skin, I begin to feel comfortable in my own skin in a way that I never have before. And I talk to her about God, and I say, well, and I can really nutshell this for you guys. Basically, all questions about God come down to one thing. What if my life doesn't work out, right? And she says, if God not wanted it, not happen. If God wants it to happen, it will happen. She's also very sexy, okay? I mean, she is really sexy. She's got a high forehead, regal cheekbones, dark black hair, black eyes that are full of passion and empathy, full lips, a nose that could be mistaken for a Sephardic Jewess, and skin the color of latte that looks like it probably tastes just as good. I'm telling you, don't go to the West Bank. So the conversations continue, and eventually she starts sending me videos about Muslim Hasidic relationships. She sends me a video of a Hasid and a woman wearing a burqa walking through Crown Heights. And I'm getting a little bit nervous. In fact, while this is happening, I'm at a winemaker's dinner surrounded by Israelis, settler Israelis. Not exactly the biggest Hillary Clinton supporters, but nevertheless, friendly people. And I freak out, basically. With all of my background in Torah, with my observancy, with the fact that she's living in an Arab country, with the idea of me walking hand in hand with a woman who wears a burqa, not that she wore a burqa, I flip out. I start having visions of Hitler when I'm sleeping at night. And it's no joke, I can't sleep. I don't sleep for 3 days. And finally, I call her up and I say, look, I just don't think I can marry somebody who's not Jewish. She happens to be poolside at a hotel in Abu Dhabi and looks gorgeous, which is really unfortunate for me. And she says, look, you can't be with somebody you're not at peace with. You have to be able to sleep at night. If it's not meant to be, it's not meant to be. Just know that you have a friend in Jordan, and I wish you all the best. Now, I have never had an experience like that with a woman. Usually when there's a breakup, there are tears, there is rage, there is coldness. It's never like, hey, that's groovy, bro. And so I'm a little bit lost at this experience. But my time at the winery, my internship is coming to an end. It's December, it's raining. I decide finally I want to go see the ancient city of Shiloh next to the Shiloh settlement. I go there. There's tons of stones left there. There's some cheesy dramatic recreation of what it was like at that time. Like the Benjamites have offended us. Let's kill them. Yeah, that kind of stuff. And I look around and I realize I'm the only one here. It's kind of like going back to your high school 3,000 years after you graduated. And I realize it's time for me to go home. I need to go back to California. So I pack everything up. I say farewell to the loving family. I go to the kotel and daven, standing next to a 5-year-old boy who's also thanking the Creator for life for asking for a new toy. I'm not sure which. And I book my flight. But something in me comes up. I feel I have to meet her. I mean, when else am I going to have a chance to meet a Palestinian Muslim? When else am I going to be able to go to Jordan? When else? If not now, when? So before I do that, I decided to call a friend of mine, Ben, back here in Berkeley. Now, Ben's a cynical, jaded old gay Jew, and he likes to call me on my bullshit. He's an atheist, and he says, Mike, there was the woman in Cape Town. There was the woman in Switzerland. Don't you think this pattern of dating unavailable women might be peaking at this point with a Palestinian Muslim in Jordan? Now, Ben had a point. But this is one of those moments in my life that I can only really describe as a Michael K. moment. You see, while most people choose the smart decision, the safe decision, in situations like this, I think back to that great moment in the 1982 film Repo Man with Harry Dean Stanton, Zichrono Livracha, who in coaching Emilio Estevez in his new position as a repo man, says to him, you see, son, most people spend their lives trying to get out of tense situations. Repo men spend their life trying to get into tense situations. I booked my flight to Amman. Now, I texted Aziza. I told her I was coming. She was ecstatic. It just so happened that this was her birthday weekend. Oh, that's cute. So we make plans. I get to Ben Gurion. I get to security. For those of you who've been through Israeli security, you kind of have a feel for this, but I'll paint the picture for those of you who have not done this. You go through a very long line. You get up there, and then they ask you all sorts of questions. Where did you bar mitzvah? Who do you know? Why were you here? Why are you leaving? Who packed your bag? Who really packed your bag? And I have to tell them where I'm going, of course. And I say, I'm going to Amman, Jordan. And the guy says, why? And I said, I'm going to meet someone. Who are you going to meet? I'm going to meet this Arab woman. How do you know her? I say, Tinder. Now, it turns out that Israeli security have not been briefed on the Tinder situation. So he calls in his manager, who goes through all the same questions. Who did your bris? Everything, And he also does not know what to do when I tell him I met her on Tinder. He says, but she is an Arab. Now, can you imagine that conversation happening in the States? It wouldn't happen. But there it happens. I say, yes, I know. I'm Jewish. And he looks at me and he stamps my passport and I go through. I get to the counter for Royal Jordanian. And it's about an hour till the flight leaves. And I go to check in and they say, we don't have a reservation for you, sir. I said, what do you mean? I booked it this afternoon through BritishAirways.com. I used some miles that I learned from a Dan's Deal scheme, and I paid a little extra money. And they said, we don't have a reservation, sir. So I said, well, the flight leaves in an hour. What am I supposed to do? They said, well, you can go to ticketing. So I run to ticketing. There's a woman there who looks like a sort of blonde version of Golda Meir. And she looks up my reservation. She says, I see there was a reservation, but it has disappeared. What do you mean it's disappeared? I don't know, it has disappeared. She starts smoking a cigarette. In Israel, they smoke cigarettes, while they're making your food in the operating room. It's just like, it doesn't matter. So I say to her, well, what can I do? My flight leaves in 5 minutes. She's like, why don't you call British Airways in London? British Airways in London? The British. Haven't they screwed everything up everywhere they've gone? Did Gandhi ever have to call British Airways? So I managed through the Wi-Fi to use Viber, and I get through to British Airways in London. And the woman over there is like the Mother Teresa of British Airways. I think her name was like Millicent Buttersworth or something. And she is like, I'm so sorry, sir. This is unheard of. Let me help you. So she discovers, she's like, yes, you did have a reservation, but it did disappear. I've never seen this in my history. Let me see if I can find it for you. Like, what do you mean find it? Just give me the reservation, So I'm spending like 20 minutes there. The flight's leaving in 35 minutes. She's like, sir, I have reinstated your reservation. I will stay on the line with you until you are on that plane. So I run back to ticketing, and sort of like that final scene in Argo where they're trying to leave the Arab country, except I'm trying to get into the Arab country. I'm like, find it. She looks it up, and she says, oh, it's there, yes. You go back to the counter and check in. So I go back to the counter, it's like 20 minutes, the flight's leaving. They look it up, I hear some dot matrix printer in the background, print out this thing. She's like, here's a lounge pass for our business lounge, enjoy yourself. And she gives me the ticket. I run through, I get to Israeli security. There's a second layer of Israeli security, right? This is the place where you take off your shoes, your belts, and you put your computer through the thing or whatever. And I go through, and then I suddenly realize I left my hat back where I was calling the woman from British Airways. So I go and I see the security woman, the security woman at this second juncture, and I say, I have to go back to get my hat. And she points to my kippah. She says, but you are already wearing a hat. I say, no, I have another hat. Why do you need two hats? I say, can I go? She's like, okay. So I go, I run back, I grab my ski hat because I didn't feel like I could maybe be wearing my kippah around Jordan. I grab the ski hat, I go through, as I run through, I point to it to her. She's totally unimpressed. And I managed to get on the flight. And as it begins to take off and the lights of Israel are sparkling beneath me like gold dust on a black velvet shawl, the safety announcements come over, and they're in Arabic. Good thing I knew how to use a seatbelt. When I arrive in Jordan, the first thing the passport control says to me is, why are you here? It's very interesting. It's very hard to get into Israel, it's very hard to leave Israel, and it's very hard to get into Jordan. But he looks at me, and he looks at me very suspiciously. And I realize he's right. I am suspicious. I say, look, I'm visiting a friend. Because she had told me, don't tell them who you're visiting because it could be a problem because I work in the airline industry. So I'm thinking, God, what is this? And then I suddenly start thinking, like, as I am standing there in Jordan, what am I doing? Like, what is my goal here? So he stamps my passport and I'm through. And I'm in the Jordanian airport in Amman. And I'm the only person in the whole airport. It's midnight. There's one person at the hijab-wearing woman who's sitting at the information booth on her smartphone. Aziza has been waiting for me at this point for 6 hours. She had previously flown to Moscow that morning to do a flight to Moscow and a flight back. She is out there in her high heels. She's exhausted, and I've never met her. I go to the carousel to get my bag. 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, there is no bag. I go on the Wi-Fi and manage to get onto WhatsApp, and I text her. I say, they've lost, I don't know where my bag is. She said, go to the baggage office, and I will try to go over there too. So I go into the baggage office, which looks even more third world than Israel did. You know, there's sort of like a picture of King Abdullah, a little tilted there, multiple dot matrix printers, you know, kind of a counter, big wide ties. Sunglasses, I mean, it's night, so not really, but I threw that in there. So I go and I explain to them the situation. They said, in 10 minutes, your bag will arrive. So I go back to the carousel, I text Aziza, 10 minutes goes by, 15, another 20 minutes, and now I'm freaking out. No baggage has arrived. I go back to the baggage office, and I tell them my bag has not arrived. So they call Tel Aviv, and they get off the phone, and they say, sir, your bag has disappeared. It's lost. So while I thought I had outsmarted Israeli security, it seems like on the way, potentially, they had tried to prevent me from getting on the flight, hiding my suitcase, or maybe just everything just got messed up. I don't know. But I look through the window going into the airport lobby, and I see this unbelievably striking woman in a stewardess's outfit. And at that point, I think, well, I have lost everything. I have nothing. There's one person in Jordan who knows me. I hope that's her. And I text her, I say, I've lost my bag. I've never lost a bag before in any of my travels. She says, I'm right outside. I'm so sorry. So I pat down my hair. I look at myself. I look terrible. And I decide to go out. And I walk into the Amman waiting area, and there she is. And she's beautiful, and she's wearing a little red hat with her hair pinned up in her flight attendant's outfit, with her sort of blush on and her red lipstick and her high heels. And it's a really awkward moment. And I walk up to her, and she says, I'm so sorry about your bag. And I said, yeah, well. And I'm standing there, and she's standing there. And I just say, well, it's nice to finally meet you. And I give her a hug. And she says, I'm so nervous. I said, yeah, me too. So she says, let's get a cab. We'll go back to my place. It's an hour from here. So it's now 1:30 in the morning by the time we arrive at her place. And, you know, conversation in the drive over there was a lot more stilted than I thought it would be. And we get there, and now I really have no cell phone reception. You know, my plan does not cover Jordan. And we walk into her tiny little apartment. I had offered to put us up in the Intercontinental Hotel in separate beds, but she said, no, I want you to see my home. And when we walk in, there's a big table on the right-hand side, and there are all these delicacies, fruits and rice cakes, and then all these brand new silverware and brand new plates and brand new glasses. And I say, now mind you, I'd only planned to be there for 24 hours. I ask her, what is this? And she says, it's for you so you can keep kosher. I'd never seen such kindness. I'd never experienced such kindness. But I was still scared. I was, after all, in an Arab's apartment in an Arab country with no way to communicate with the outside world that I knew of. Only one person knew that I was there. And she says, have a seat. She goes into her room, she changes into something more comfortable, she comes out. And as she sits down, I start hearing this crying, this wailing all around the house, like a sandstorm of cries. And I ask her, what is that? She says, that's the call to prayer. And I say, you know, I hear the call to prayer in Israel, but it's never like that, never so loud. It sounds like the Rolling Stones, give me shelter. And she says, what is the Rolling Stones? And I realize I really am in a foreign land. And I say, I'm scared, you know, I lost my bag. It had my tefillin in it, which then I have to explain to her what tefillin are, which I'd had for 20 years. I have no toothbrush, I have no change of clothes. And she says, don't worry, Michael, don't worry. I said, I just think God did not want me to come. And, you know, months later, from now, I can see that that was probably the most hurtful thing I could have possibly said. But she took it in stride and she said, if God didn't want you here, you wouldn't be here. And at that moment, I burst into tears because I didn't know what else to do. So she comforted me, she held my hand, and I said, look, I'm really cold too. It was very cold, it was winter, and if anybody knows, in Israel, the housing is terribly non-insulated, and it's even worse in Amman. So she says, well, we can go into my bedroom. There's a heater in there. It's warm in there. And I felt awkward, but it was warm and I was cold. So we went in there and we climbed on her bed, because that's really all there was in the room. And I noticed there was a poster of Amy Winehouse on the wall. I thought, oh, no, she's pretty cool. This girl's pretty cool. So she sees me looking at Amy Winehouse and she says, it's so sad. I said, what, do you mean the drug? She's like, yes. I said, well, I think she had a hard life. And she says, but why drugs? I said, well, you know, when I've had a hard time in life, I've often made choices that weren't the best either. And she says, you know, you were so non-judgmental. That's the Berkeley term. But she basically said, you have an open heart. And she says, I want to tell you something. And she proceeds to tell me about the story of when her mother died and how her mother spoke to her about the challenges she faced being an Arab woman in a profession. You know, she was an Arabic professor, where she was torn between tradition and the modern world. And Aziza says to me, I never knew this. I never knew about my mom. And then she says, you know what? I feel so safe with you. And she lies down and she puts her head on my chest. And in a few minutes, she falls asleep. So now I'm in an Arab country with an Arab woman in her bed with no clothes to change into, and the only point of familiarity is Amy Winehouse. I grab a blanket, I pull it over my slacks and my shirt, I put it over her, and I fall asleep. In the morning when I wake up, she has an incredible breakfast ready for me. Rice cakes with almond butter and pomegranate seeds with slices of banana, labneh, I mean there's labneh everywhere, hummus, tea, coffee, juice. It's like being at a hotel, except she's just doing this because that's who she is. Anyway, I say to her, I really appreciate this, but I'm freaking out about my bag. Can you call the airport and find out about the bag? So she calls. She says to me, don't worry, I know they will have it. I'm thinking she probably has some kind of mystical Arab intuition. She's talking to them in Arabic on the phone, and she's arguing with them. And I'm thinking, this woman is arguing for me in Arabic. How did that happen? And it's also really sexy. I never knew, like, Arabic is like such a romantic language. She gets off the phone, she says, they have your bag. And I said, how did you know? I know it's because you're in touch with God, right? She says, no, I'm a flight attendant. This happens all the time. So We decide to take a walk around Amman before going back to the airport to get my bag. She shows me her favorite coffee shop, which kind of feels like an Oakland hipster joint. Everybody's got their shaved heads and their coiffed hair and a big piece of something in their earlobes. Except it's a little bit different because on the menu is Iranian tea, Iraqi tea, Yemenite tea, and then quote-unquote normal tea. I go for the Persian tea, which is made with rose water and is delicious. We walk down the street. I see a bumper sticker of Bart Simpson wearing a keffiyeh. I see a poster for Theodore Adorno, the 1930s social critic that I had used when I was an undergraduate at Cal to write about rock and roll history. And I say, "Are you kidding me? What is this?" She said, "Oh, we have lots of interesting people who come here." And I realized she probably doesn't know who he is. Neither do most people. Probably most of you don't know who he is. But anyway, the fact that my favorite social critic has a poster for an upcoming presentation on him makes me feel just a little bit more comfortable. We walk by a mosque. It's the closest I've ever been to a mosque. And she says, "Please put your arm in mine." So I'm putting my arm in hers. We're walking by a mosque. I really don't know where the hell I am. And in this moment, she is really wanting me to be the man. She is wanting me to be strong. And yet I'm in the most vulnerable position I could possibly be in. And yet at that moment, it's so empowering. It feels awesome. We go back out to the airport. We get the bag. I come back. Thank God I daven with my tefillin. I feel comfortable. I look on her refrigerator as I'm davening, and there's a little magnet that says, "Missing you in Warsaw." And I'm thinking, wow, not the kind of magnet you'd see on a Jewish fridge. But we decide it's now evening, and it is her birthday, and I've never taken her on a date. Turns out there's a vegan restaurant in Amman called Shams. Shams was the name of Rumi's teacher, Rumi the poet, if you are familiar with his work. And Rumi says, the goal is not to find love. The goal is to remove all the barriers within yourself in order to be available for love. So we get to this restaurant, and again, I'm still feeling very unsure of where we are. But we walk in, and they're playing Billie Holiday. And suddenly, I feel more relaxed. The walls are made of wood. It feels more like California. And the couple sitting at the table next to us look Jewish, and they're speaking English. She orders this plethora of incredible delicacies, vegan this, more pomegranate seeds, more hummus, but like, you know, date syrup pouring from the clouds. And she says to me, "I feel like I am in heaven. Don't you?" And of course, in the typical male way, I say, I don't know, we're still getting to know each other, you know, I just arrived. You know, I don't know, it's like, I think is it the Y chromosome that sort of brings up those kind of responses? I don't know. Anyway, we have a lovely dinner, and in the middle of the dinner, she gets a text. "Oh shit," she says, "I have to go to the airport. I was supposed to be scheduled for tomorrow night, but they need me there tonight." So I say, "It's okay. Tomorrow is, you know, Friday, it's Erev Shabbat. I have to be back in Israel anyway." So we go back to her place, and on the drive over, she asks me something. She says, "What is your love language?" Now, in a pickup bar, that would be the cheesiest line you could possibly come up with. What's your love language? Maybe at a Jewish renewal retreat, that would be a subject for a workshop. But in this context, she wants to know something that I don't know the answer to. She is essentially saying, how do you show love, say, in the way that everyone prior to Sigmund Freud did? So we get back to her apartment. She tells me, "Have you told anybody that you're here?" And I said, "Yes, my brother-in-law, Andy Sinton." He's not really my brother-in-law. He's my brother's brother-in-law, but that just works. She says, "You must text him now and tell him that you are okay." And I say, no, it's no big deal. She says, text him. So I text him and he says, thank God you texted me. I was so worried. I thought you'd been kidnapped by Hezbollah. I didn't know what to do. You know, I know Saul's going to be so angry at me, your brother. He's going to kill me. This is terrible. And once again, I realized women know things. You know, they just know things. She gives me a book to take with me home. She packs her bag. And at midnight, almost 24 hours after I arrive, she disappears into the night to go to fly to Bahrain. I'm left there in an apartment with a key. And I'm still thinking about the question, what is my love language? So I decide to clean her apartment. I clean her room. I organize things by my own sort of categorical system. Hair products, medicines, clothes, more hair products, more clothes. And at 3 in the morning, Hassam, the taxi driver, arrives to pick me up, to take me to the airport. The 3rd time I will have gone to this airport in 24 hours. And as I get into the car, I notice there's no seatbelt. He says, yes, it didn't work, so I took it out. This is very comforting. We drive out to the airport, going through the night in Jordan. And I don't know what's going to be coming down the pike. I don't know that when I arrive back in America, she's going to reveal to me that her grandfather and uncle had been killed by the IDF. I don't know that when I come back to America, Donald Trump is going to start banning Muslims from visiting here. And while you think Jordan wasn't on the 7 countries list, they were on a prescribed list that would only allow her to visit for 2 days at a time. I didn't know how my community would handle this. Would my rabbis abandon me? Would my friends abandon me? Even my friends, my progressive Orthodox friends who support gay marriage, would they support an interfaith relationship? Would they support a Palestinian? But more to the point, would I? But in that moment, on that night, on that road, it's just me and Hassam driving out to the airport. And he says to me, you know, I used to go shopping in Syria, great deals until the war. I love Iraq, but it's very hard to get there. I love Lebanon, but too dangerous now. And it becomes very clear to me that watching these bombed out scenes on the TV, followed by the latest in sports, doesn't tell you anything about what lies on the other side of a boundary. Only by actually going there, only by availing yourself to the experience, can you actually find out what it's like. And he asked me, have you ever been to the Dead Sea? And I say, yes, but I don't want to tell him in Israel because who knows where we're going? He might be with Hezbollah. He might be with, Al-Qaeda, or not Al-Qaeda, but, the Al-Aqsa Brigade. I don't know, maybe he works for United. So I just say, yes, it is beautiful. And he says, you must come back to our country. Our king, we love our king. It is a beautiful country. You promise me you'll come back? I say, yes, I'll come back. And in that moment, it's just 2 men, 2 guys, driving through the night on a road. And maybe I don't have a seatbelt, and maybe I don't know where I'm going. But wherever it is, I know it will surprise me. And thank you.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I'm going to do that.